You don't get to decide who deserves to be helped. The words hung in the air as Sarah Williams stood just inches from the hospital entrance, her hand resting protectively over her growing belly. The Georgia heat pressed down around the building, a steady 82 degrees, making the pavement shimmer and the moment feel heavier than it should have. Officer Ryan Cole stood firm in front of her, arms crossed, uniform crisp, his expression set with authority that didn't waver. Behind him, the automatic doors slid open and shut as patients and staff moved in and out, but for a brief moment, it felt like time had slowed to a crawl. Sarah's breathing was uneven, her voice calm but strained as she tried again. "Sir, I need to get inside. This isn't something that can wait." Her words carried urgency, but Cole didn't budge. He glanced at her, then past her, as if she were just another person trying to bend the rules. "Then you should have planned better," he replied flatly, his tone dismissive, almost rehearsed. A few people nearby slowed their steps, watching, sensing tension without fully understanding it. A nurse at the entrance hesitated, glancing between them, clearly unsure whether to intervene. Sarah's fingers tightened slightly, her posture still composed despite the discomfort she was feeling. She had faced moments like this before, moments where she was seen as less than what she was, moments where assumptions spoke louder than truth. But today felt different. Today wasn't about pride or patience. Today was about time. She took a slow breath, steadying herself, then said quietly, "You're standing between me and something important." Cole raised an eyebrow, unimpressed. "And you think I haven't heard that before?" he replied, shifting his weight as if the conversation was already over. But then something changed. A subtle shift in the crowd. A low murmur passed through the people nearby as a black SUV pulled up to the curb, engine idling with quiet authority. The driver stepped out first, followed by another man who closed the door behind him. There was no rush, no urgency in their movements, just certainty. The man's eyes locked onto the scene immediately, scanning, assessing, understanding more than he was letting on. Sarah didn't turn around right away, but her posture straightened just slightly. Officer Cole noticed the change too, his expression tightening, his confidence beginning to fracture by something he couldn't yet name. The man took a few measured steps forward, stopping just behind Sarah before finally speaking, his voice calm but unmistakably firm. "Officer, I think you should take a closer look at who you're speaking to." Cole's eyes flickered between the two of them, a flicker of doubt creeping into his stance as the weight of the moment began to shift. But the truth had not yet been revealed, and what was about to unfold would change everything. Officer Ryan Cole hesitated for just a fraction of a second, his eyes narrowing as he studied the man who had just spoken. The calm tone, the steady presence, it did not match the urgency he expected from a bystander. "I am handling this situation," Cole replied, his voice firm but now carrying a subtle edge, as if he felt something slipping from his control. Sarah stood silently between them, her breathing still uneven, but her focus sharpened as she glanced toward the man who had arrived. The tension in the air thickened, drawing the attention of the small crowd gathered near the entrance, their quiet murmurs growing into uneasy whispers. The man did not raise his voice. Instead, he took another step forward, his gaze never leaving Officer Cole. "You are blocking access to emergency care," he said calmly, each word deliberate, measured, carrying weight that made nearby onlookers pause. Cole scoffed lightly, shifting his stance. "She can wait like everyone else," he responded, his confidence returning in layers, as if he needed to convince not only the others, but himself. Sarah's expression tightened slightly at those words, but she did not speak. Instead, she placed both hands over her stomach, steadying herself, her posture remaining composed despite the growing pressure. The man beside her glanced briefly at her condition, then back at Cole. "You should reconsider that statement," he said, his voice quieter now, but more direct, more grounded. "This is not about waiting. This is about urgency." A nurse nearby took a cautious step forward, her voice soft but concerned. "Officer, maybe we can let her in while we sort this out. She clearly needs attention." Cole turned his head slightly toward the nurse, his jaw tightening, his authority now being questioned from multiple sides. "And who exactly are you?" he asked, his tone sharp. The nurse hesitated for a moment before answering. "I work here, and I am telling you, this does not look like a situation that should be delayed." The words hung in the air, adding another layer of pressure to the moment. Sarah exhaled slowly, her voice gentle but firm as she finally spoke again. I am not asking for special treatment. I am asking for care. Her words cut through the tension, quiet but powerful in their simplicity. For a brief moment, no one spoke. The sounds of the hospital continued behind them, but at the entrance, everything felt suspended. The man beside Sarah reached into his jacket and retrieved a phone, holding it calmly at his side. Cole's eyes flickered toward it, sensing that the situation was about to shift in a direction he could not control. The man did not rush. He did not threaten. Instead, he simply said, "Then let us resolve this properly." The phrase lingered, signaling that what came next would no longer be about assumptions or authority, but about truth. And somewhere beneath the surface of that truth, something far greater was beginning to emerge, something that would change how every person standing there understood the moment they were witnessing. The moment lingered, stretched thin like a thread about to snap, as Officer Ryan Cole glanced between the man beside Sarah and the phone now resting calmly in his hand. The small crowd at the entrance seemed to hold its breath, sensing that whatever came next would no longer be ordinary. Sarah stood quietly, her posture steady despite the discomfort, her eyes focused forward, not reacting to the rising tension around her. The man beside her finally unlocked his phone and turned the screen slightly toward Officer Cole. "Before this continues," he said in a calm, controlled voice, "you should see this." Cole hesitated, his gaze dropping to the screen, his expression tightening as he tried to make sense of what he was seeing. The screen displayed official identification, clean, precise, and unmistakably legitimate. But Cole did not react immediately, as if his mind was resisting what his eyes were beginning to accept. Around them, the murmurs grew softer, replaced by silence, as if the entire group understood that something important was unfolding. Sarah remained still, her hand resting over her stomach, her breathing slow but deliberate, as though she had been preparing for this exact moment. The man did not rush Cole. He allowed the weight of the moment to settle, giving the officer time to process. "You have been preventing a patient from accessing care," the man continued, his tone unchanged, "and now you have the opportunity to correct that." Cole's jaw tightened slightly, his confidence beginning to waver, but he did not respond right away. Instead, he looked at Sarah again, really looked at her this time, noticing details he had ignored before, the composure, the presence, the quiet authority that did not match what he had assumed moments earlier. Sarah met his gaze, her expression calm but firm, and in that silence, something shifted. Not through force, not through confrontation, but through realization. A second later, the man stepped forward slightly, closing the distance just enough to make his presence undeniable. "Officer," he said, his voice now carrying a quiet finality, "you are standing in front of someone who does not need to prove her right to be treated with respect. She already has it." Cole's eyes flickered back to the phone, then to Sarah, then back again, the pieces beginning to align in his mind. The atmosphere around them had changed completely, no longer tense in the same way, but charged with anticipation. A few steps behind them, the hospital doors opened again, and another staff member emerged, pausing immediately as they took in the scene. "Is everything okay here?" the staff member asked cautiously, unaware of how close the moment was to shifting entirely. The man beside Sarah did not answer immediately. Instead, he looked at Officer Cole and said, "That depends on what you choose to do next." Cole stood still, the weight of the situation pressing against him from all sides, his authority no longer the center of the moment. For the first time since this began, the question was not whether he could enforce control, but whether he would choose to release it. And in that choice, everything was about to change. Officer Ryan Cole stood frozen for a moment, the weight of the situation pressing down on him as the small crowd continued to watch in silence, waiting for his response. The man beside Sarah held his phone steady, not forcing anything, simply allowing reality to settle in. Sarah herself remained composed, her breathing steady but measured, as if she understood that this moment was no longer about her request, but about the decision standing in front of her. Cole finally exhaled slowly, his shoulders tightening as he shifted his stance, trying to regain control over a situation that no longer seemed within his grasp. If this is some kind of intimidation tactic, he began, his voice cautious now, then I need to confirm your identity properly. The man nodded once, not resisting, not arguing, simply unlocking his phone further and navigating to additional information, placing it in a position where Cole could clearly see the credentials displayed. Around them, the nurse from earlier stepped closer, her voice gentle but urgent. Officer, I am telling you, she needs medical attention immediately. This is not something that can be delayed. Cole glanced toward the nurse, then back at the phone, his eyes narrowing as the pieces began to come together more clearly. Sarah took a small step forward, not aggressively, but with quiet intent, her voice soft yet firm as she spoke again. I am not here to create a problem. I am here because I need help. Her words were simple, but they carried a weight that seemed to shift the atmosphere further. Cole's expression changed, the certainty he once carried beginning to erode as he looked at her differently now, as if seeing her for the first time. The man beside her finally spoke again, his tone calm, but unmistakably authoritative. She is not just a patient. She is someone you are legally obligated to assist. The phrase lingered, leaving no room for interpretation. A few people in the crowd exchanged glances, sensing that the situation had moved beyond a simple misunderstanding. The hospital door slid open again, and another staff member approached, drawn by the growing tension. What is happening here? The staff member asked, concern evident in their voice. The nurse quickly responded. We have a patient who needs immediate care, and access has been delayed. The staff member looked at Sarah, then at Officer Cole, their expression shifting as they processed the scene in front of them. Officer, unless there is a legal reason for this delay, we need to prioritize her condition. Cole stood still, the words pressing against his authority, forcing him to confront a choice he could no longer avoid. He looked at Sarah once more, noticing the subtle strain in her expression, the effort it took for her to remain standing and composed. For a brief moment, the noise around them seemed to fade, leaving only the quiet realization that this moment was no longer about authority or control, but about responsibility and the consequences of what came next. And as the man beside Sarah lowered his phone slightly, the full weight of the truth was about to become undeniable in a way that would leave no room for doubt. Officer Ryan Cole finally lowered his gaze, the tension in his shoulders easing just slightly as the weight of responsibility began to override his earlier certainty. The man beside Sarah remained still, observing without pressure, while Sarah herself held her position with quiet strength, her focus never drifting despite the discomfort she was experiencing. Around them, the crowd grew more attentive, the silence now filled with expectation rather than confusion. Cole took a slow breath, his voice softer than before as he spoke. If this situation is as serious as you are indicating, then I will need confirmation from hospital administration. His tone had shifted, no longer defensive, but cautious, as if he was trying to navigate a situation that had already outgrown his initial judgment. The staff member who had arrived earlier stepped forward, nodding with urgency. We can confirm immediately. There is no reason to delay care if there is a medical need. The nurse beside them added quickly, she needs to be evaluated now. Every second matters. Sarah's expression tightened slightly, not from frustration, but from the physical strain she had been enduring, her composure holding together through sheer determination. The man beside her finally stepped forward again, this time raising his voice just enough to be heard clearly by everyone present. Then let us remove any doubt, he said, turning his phone so that it faced both the officer and the staff. This is not about permission. This is about responsibility. Cole looked down at the screen once more, and this time, his expression changed more noticeably, his posture shifting as the implications became clearer. The identification was no longer just a suggestion, it was undeniable. A quiet realization seemed to spread through the group, and even the nearby bystanders began to sense that the situation had taken on a completely different meaning. The staff member nodded, then looked at Cole directly. Officer, we will take responsibility for this patient from here. You can assist by allowing access. Cole hesitated for a moment, then took a small step to the side, his stance no longer blocking the entrance. It was a subtle movement, but it marked a significant shift in the moment. Sarah did not rush forward. Instead, she took a breath, steady and controlled, before beginning to walk slowly toward the entrance. As she passed Officer Cole, she paused briefly, her voice calm and clear as she spoke. "I appreciate your cooperation." The words were not accusatory, but they carried a quiet weight that lingered in the air. Cole gave a slight nod, unable to find the right words in response. The man followed just behind Sarah, maintaining a steady presence as they moved into the hospital. Inside, the lighting was brighter, the sounds more active, with nurses and staff moving with purpose. The earlier tension at the entrance began to fade, replaced by a sense of urgency and focus as Sarah was guided toward immediate care. As they moved further inside, the man beside her glanced back once, his expression steady, as if acknowledging that the situation had reached its turning point. And though nothing had been said explicitly, the shift was clear. The moment had transformed from one of conflict into one of recognition, and the consequences of that transformation were only beginning to unfold. The hospital hallway was filled with steady movement, the quiet rhythm of footsteps, distant voices, and the soft beeping of machines creating a backdrop that felt both calm and urgent at the same time. Sarah Williams had already been moved into a nearby treatment area, where a team of medical staff worked quickly and efficiently, their focus entirely on her condition. She lay still, her breathing monitored, her expression composed but clearly strained, while the staff communicated in calm, precise tones. The man who had arrived with her stood just outside the room, watching through the glass, his posture steady but attentive, as if he were ensuring that nothing else would interfere with her care. A few moments passed before Officer Ryan Cole appeared at the end of the hallway, his steps slower than before, his earlier confidence replaced with a more reflective and measured demeanor. He approached cautiously, stopping at a respectful distance from the room where Sarah was being cared for. The man turned slightly, acknowledging his presence without tension. "You handled the situation," the man said quietly, not as praise, but as recognition of the decision that had been made. Cole nodded once, his voice low as he responded, "I did not realize the full context of what I was dealing with." The words were honest, carrying a weight that suggested he understood the significance of what had just occurred. The man studied him for a moment, then said, "Context matters. So does how we respond when we are uncertain." His tone remained calm, but there was an underlying message that extended beyond the immediate moment. Cole looked toward the room where Sarah was receiving care, then back at the man. "I made assumptions," he admitted, his voice steady but subdued. "And those assumptions nearly prevented someone from receiving immediate help." The admission lingered in the air, not as an excuse, but as a realization. The man gave a slight nod, acknowledging the statement. "What matters now is that she received the care she needed," he replied. Inside the room, a nurse stepped out briefly, giving a reassuring update that the patient was stable and receiving appropriate attention. The news seemed to ease the tension that had been building, allowing the environment to settle into a more focused and controlled atmosphere. Cole exhaled slowly, his posture straightening slightly as he absorbed the outcome of the situation. "I will make sure this is documented properly," he said, his tone firm again, but now grounded in accountability rather than authority. The man turned back toward the room, his expression calm. "That is the correct step," he replied. A few moments later, Sarah's voice could be heard faintly from inside, speaking with one of the medical staff, her tone clear and composed, indicating that she was responsive and in capable care. The sound of her voice seemed to reinforce the outcome of the moment, confirming that despite the tension and delay, the situation had moved toward resolution. Cole took one last look at the scene, then stepped back, allowing space for the professionals to continue their work without interference. As he walked away slowly down the hallway, the events of the day remained with him, a quiet reminder that every decision carries weight, and that true understanding often comes not from authority, but from the willingness to recognize when one must step aside and let the truth lead the way. The hospital hallway had grown quieter, the earlier tension replaced by a steady rhythm of controlled activity as staff continued moving with purpose behind the closed doors. Officer Ryan Cole stood near the end of the corridor for a moment longer, watching the flow of people and the quiet efficiency of the environment, as if trying to fully absorb the weight of what had just happened. His expression remained serious, but there was a subtle shift in his posture, a quiet acknowledgement that the situation had changed him in some way. A few steps away, the man who had accompanied Sarah remained still, his presence calm and composed, his attention divided between the hospital room and the officer standing nearby. After a brief silence, Cole spoke again, his voice low but clear. "I will be reviewing my actions and documenting everything that occurred today," he said, his tone reflecting a sense of responsibility rather than defensiveness. The man nodded slightly, acknowledging the statement without judgment. "That is the right approach," he replied. "Accountability is not about punishment. It is about ensuring that situations like this are handled correctly moving forward." Cole took in the words, then glanced toward the room where Sarah was still receiving care. The sound of her voice could occasionally be heard, soft and steady, indicating that she was responsive and in the hands of capable professionals. For a brief moment, the hallway felt still, as if everything had settled into place after a period of disruption. "She seems strong," Cole said quietly, almost to himself. The man beside him responded, "She is. And she should never have been put in a position where strength was required just to receive basic care." The statement carried a quiet weight, one that extended beyond the immediate situation. Cole nodded slowly, accepting the truth of it without resistance. "I understand that now," he said. A short pause followed, allowing the words to settle between them. The man then added, "Understanding is the first step. What comes next is what defines the outcome." Cole did not respond immediately, but the message was clear. Moments later, one of the medical staff stepped into the hallway, offering a brief update. "The patient is stable," they said, their voice calm and professional. "We will continue monitoring her, but there are no immediate concerns." The tension that had lingered in the space seemed to ease further, replaced by a sense of quiet relief. The man gave a small nod of acknowledgement, then looked toward Cole once more. "Then the situation has been resolved," he said simply. Cole exhaled slowly, his shoulders relaxing slightly as he processed the words. "Yes," he replied. "It has." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The hospital continued its steady rhythm around them, people moving, working, and focusing on what mattered most. The earlier confrontation, though still present in memory, no longer defined the moment. Instead, what remained was the understanding that had been gained, the realization that decisions carry consequences, and that those consequences can shape more than just a single moment in time. Cole gave a final glance toward the room, then turned and began walking down the hallway, his steps steady and deliberate, as he carried the weight of the experience forward with him, knowing that it would stay with him long after he left the hospital. The hallway outside the hospital room had settled into a calm that felt almost unreal compared to the tension just moments before, as the steady hum of activity continued around Officer Ryan Cole and the man who had accompanied Sarah Williams. Cole walked slowly, his steps measured, his mind clearly processing the events that had unfolded and the decisions that followed. His expression remained serious, but there was a quiet shift in his demeanor, a sense that he was no longer reacting to the moment, but reflecting on it. The man stood where he was for a moment longer, watching as Cole moved farther down the corridor before turning his attention back toward the room where Sarah was being cared for. Inside, the environment was focused and precise, with medical staff continuing to monitor her condition, their movements efficient and calm. The sound of equipment created a steady rhythm that reinforced the sense of control within the space. After a few moments, one of the medical professionals stepped into the hallway, closing the door gently behind them. "Her condition is stable," they said, their voice even and reassuring. "She is responding well, and we will continue to monitor her closely." The man nodded in acknowledgement, his expression unchanged but attentive. "Thank you," he replied. The staff member gave a small nod before returning to their duties, disappearing back into the room as the door closed softly behind them. The man remained in place, then slowly looked down the hallway, his gaze thoughtful. "Hey!" Short distance away, Officer Cole had paused near a window, his reflection faintly visible in the glass as he looked out, his posture still, his thoughts clearly inward. The man began walking toward him, each step unhurried, carrying the same calm presence he had maintained throughout the entire encounter. When he reached Cole, he stopped at a respectful distance. "This situation could have ended differently," the man said quietly. Cole did not respond immediately. Instead, he continued to look out the window for a moment before finally turning his head slightly toward the man. "Yes," he said, "it could have." There was no defensiveness in his tone, only acknowledgement. The man studied him briefly before speaking again. What matters now is what you choose to take from it. Cole nodded slowly, his expression reflecting a deeper level of understanding than before. I will take it seriously, he replied. Every part of it. The man accepted the response without further comment, allowing the silence between them to speak for itself. Behind them, the hospital continued its steady rhythm, a reminder that while one moment had shifted, life itself continued forward. After a few seconds, Cole straightened slightly, then looked back toward the corridor. I need to follow up on this properly, he said, his tone more certain now. The man gave a slight nod. That is the right decision. Cole hesitated for a brief moment, then added, and I will ensure that situations like this are handled differently in the future. The words carried weight, not as a promise made lightly, but as a commitment formed through experience. The man did not respond immediately. Instead, he simply gave a small nod of acknowledgement, recognizing the significance of the statement without needing to reinforce it further. As Cole began to walk away once again, his steps were steady, his posture aligned, his focus now directed toward what needed to be done next. The man remained where he stood, watching for a moment longer before turning his attention back toward the room where Sarah was resting. The moment had passed, but its impact remained, shaping not only what had happened, but what would come after. The hallway outside the hospital room felt quieter now, as if the entire building had settled into a deeper kind of stillness after everything that had unfolded. Officer Ryan Cole had already left the immediate area, his footsteps no longer echoing through the corridor, leaving behind only the faint memory of the decisions that had been made. Inside the room, Sarah Williams rested under the careful observation of medical staff, her breathing steady, her condition stable, the earlier urgency now replaced with careful monitoring and quiet professionalism. The man who had arrived with her remained nearby, standing just outside the door, his presence calm and unshaken, as if he were simply ensuring that everything continued to move in the right direction. After a moment, he turned slightly and looked through the glass again, watching as Sarah lay there, supported and safe. A medical professional approached him quietly, offering a final update. She is stable and responding well, they said, their tone calm and confident. We will continue monitoring her, but there are no concerns at this time. The man nodded once, a subtle acknowledgement of the update. Thank you for your work, he replied, his voice steady and sincere. The staff member gave a polite nod before returning to the room, closing the door gently behind them. The man remained still for a moment, his gaze lingering on the door, as if confirming that the situation had reached a stable point. A few seconds passed before he turned and began walking down the hallway, his steps measured and deliberate, blending into the steady rhythm of the hospital around him. As he moved, the earlier events seemed to settle into perspective, no longer defined by tension, but by resolution and understanding. Meanwhile, Officer Cole had reached the exit area of the hospital, pausing briefly before stepping outside into the open air. The evening light stretched across the surroundings, casting long shadows that contrasted with the brightness of the hospital behind him. He stopped for a moment, taking a breath, his mind still processing everything that had occurred. There was no anger in his expression, only reflection. He stood there for a few seconds, then slowly reached for his radio, preparing to follow through on the actions he had already committed to. His voice, when he spoke, was steady and controlled, as he began relaying details and requesting that the situation be properly reviewed and documented. Each word he spoke carried a sense of accountability, a recognition that what had happened needed to be handled with care and transparency. Back inside, Sarah remained at rest, her condition stable, her presence calm within the controlled environment of the hospital. The moment that had begun with uncertainty and tension had now transitioned into one of care, responsibility, and resolution. The man who had stood beside her earlier continued walking through the hospital corridors, eventually reaching the main entrance, where he paused and looked back one final time. The building behind him stood as a quiet reminder of everything that had taken place, and of how quickly a moment could shift when truth came to light. He took one last look, then turned and walked forward, leaving the hospital behind as the night continued to move forward, carrying with it the quiet reminder that understanding, when embraced, has the power to change everything.